My sister said I didn't fit the vibe, and just like that, I was out of the Christmas trip. But when she came back to my house, her access card no longer worked. Now my parents are begging me to talk, but I'm done being the quiet one. She said it as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. No drama, no warning, just a dismissal that hit me like a slap. Doesn't fit the vibe, Martina wrote in the family WhatsApp group, followed by 3 laughing emojis and a photo of matching Christmas pajamas spread out on her bed. No one responded right away, not mom, not dad, not even Aunt Lorna, who usually hearts every message within seconds as if she's afraid of missing a notification. I stared at the screen for maybe 2 minutes, blinking, rereading, waiting for someone to say, "What the hell?" Or "That's not funny, Martina," or even a vague, "What do you mean?" But all I got was silence. Then, finally, a thumbs up from dad that hurt more than anything else. I didn't reply not because I wasn't furious, but because I knew if I let a single word slip, it'd be the wrong one. I'd either explode or break down, and either way, it'd confirm what Martina had been hinting at for years with her subtle jabs and half-jokes, that I was the emotional one, the bitter one, the one who always made things heavier than they needed to be. So instead, I locked my phone, set it face down on the counter, and went to the kitchen to keep working on the Christmas cookie dough I'd planned to bring to the rural house in the Pyrenees, where we'd spent every Christmas since I was 12. This year, I was supposed to be the host. I'd renovated the downstairs bathroom for the occasion, repainted the guest rooms, and even bought a fake Christmas tree tall enough to touch the ceiling because I knew Mom's allergies wouldn't survive a real one. I'd asked everyone back in October, early, organized, polite, if they were okay with staying at my place this year since flights had gotten expensive and rental prices in the north had doubled. Everyone said it sounded like a great idea. Martina, for once, didn't argue, at least not to my face. But apparently sometime between then and last week, she decided it was her year again, and instead of telling me like an adult, turned it into a digital ambush, using the group chat as a stage and her role as the fun one as a weapon. She didn't say my name, she didn't need to. Doesn't fit the vibe was enough. Everyone knew who she meant. Later that night, after calming myself down and telling myself it was just a joke, that she'd gone too far, I checked the chat to see if anyone had said anything else. They had. Mom sent a message. "We'll miss you there, sweetheart. Hope you can make time for a quick dinner before we leave." That's when it sank in. It wasn't just Martina being Martina. It was Martina drawing a line and everyone else choosing to stand on her side. I didn't reply to Mom either. I didn't need to. What I needed was a screwdriver, a stepladder, and 20 minutes alone with a panel near the front door. That's where the smart lock system is. Last year, I'd installed a digital access card system for family and friends, cards they could swipe to open the front door with backup PIN codes in case the cards failed. Martina had one, my parents two, and a few others. I'd even written everyone's names on the back of their cards with a silver permanent marker, like it was some kind of club. I opened the admin panel on my laptop, clicked on Martina's name, and disabled her card. Just like that, no warning, no apologies. It was the quietest revenge I'd ever pulled off, and it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in weeks. Maybe it sounds petty, maybe it was, but here's the thing. I've spent most of my 38 years making sure other people were comfortable at the expense of my own discomfort. I've been the one left out of photos, the one excluded from toasts at dinners, the one sidelined in group conversations, then praised for being so chill about it all. And this wasn't just a canceled trip. It was a loud, clear reminder that in their eyes I was optional, forgettable, replaceable, like a chair you keep around in case someone needs an extra seat but never place at the head of the table. The next morning I woke up to 2 messages. One from Martina: "Can you bring my hiking boots to the Pyrenees? I left them in the storage room." No please, no acknowledgement, just a demand. The second was from Dad: "Heard you're not coming. What a shame." As if I'd turned down an invitation that never came, I didn't reply to either. Instead, I made myself a coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the December rain fog up the windows. I thought about how this time last year, Martina showed up 2 days early with her new boyfriend, Javier, without asking. They left beer bottles in the guest room, clogged the upstairs toilet, and forgot to pay their share of the groceries. I smiled through it all. That was the last Christmas we spent together. The more I remembered, the calmer I felt. By the time their flight took off, I'd set the alarm system to notify me if any deactivated card tried to trigger the lock. I didn't expect Martina to show up early, but if she did, I wanted to be ready. I wasn't angry anymore. I was alert, awake. And there was something strange, almost exhilarating, about no longer being included, like I'd been pushed out of something that had been quietly suffocating me. 3 days later, at 7:11 a.m., the alert came. "Access denied, card 4, Martina. 3 failed attempts." That's when I knew she thought she could come back and everything would be the same. She thought her key still worked. There's a singular kind of cruelty in growing up alongside someone who is given the same tools as you, the same house, the same meals, the same parents, and yet somehow gets crowned the golden child while you're left holding her up, smiling through gritted teeth, because that's what everyone expects of the easy daughter. Martina didn't earn the spotlight. She absorbed it like a sponge, so thirsty for attention that she dried everyone else out without even trying. And what made it worse was her knack for turning chaos into charm, how every bad decision became a funny anecdote instead of a consequence, a story retold at dinners and family gatherings where she was allowed to be outrageous and messy because that's just Martina. Meanwhile, I was praised for being reliable, for being flexible, for not needing praise. And eventually, I stopped celebrating my own victories because I knew no one else would. From as far back as I can remember, Martina had a way of walking into a room and instantly recalibrating its center of gravity. Like when she got expelled from high school at 16 for spiking the punch at the end-of-year party. My parents sat her down with a therapist and told me privately to give her some space while she worked through it, as if her behavior was a symptom of my proximity. When she crashed my car at 23 and I dared to raise my voice, Mom whispered, "She's fragile, Sophia. Not everyone's built like you," as if resilience was a curse I'd brought upon myself by being steady in a family that valued spectacle over substance. And I accepted it for years, not because I was weak, not because I agreed, but because I convinced myself that being the quiet one, the understanding one, the one who didn't need applause or validation, made me stronger. I thought low maintenance meant I was above pettiness, that playing the long game would eventually earn me a seat at the table. But what I didn't realize, until that group chat message, "doesn't fit the vibe," was that in their eyes, I wasn't even in the room anymore. I'd become so easy to ignore that they'd forgotten I ever had a voice. And what exactly was the vibe I didn't fit? It was the carefully filtered Instagram photos of the rural house with matching mugs and choreographed laughter. It was the curated playlist Martina sent out, filled with songs she assumed everyone liked because no one ever told her otherwise. It was the fact that I don't squeal with excitement during gift unwrapping games, don't cry over perfectly timed proposal videos, don't find joy in freezing my ass off for an aesthetic fireplace photo. If that's what the vibe required, then I didn't fit, and I was tired of pretending I ever did. But the real blow was Martina's words. It was everyone else's silence. The way Dad gave his little thumbs up like a stamp of approval. The way Mom sent her hollow, passive-aggressive, "will miss you" text, as if I'd chosen to exclude myself. No one said a word to challenge her. No questions, no raised eyebrows, no acknowledgement that what had just happened was a power play. And that silence spoke louder than any insult Martina could have thrown. It told me with perfect clarity that my family had settled into treating me like a wild card, something they could conveniently crop out of the picture when it didn't match the aesthetic. Still, I didn't let bitterness consume me. I didn't yell or throw things or post vague statuses about being unappreciated. Instead, I took quiet stock of the years I'd spent patching up the holes Martina made that she was never asked to fix. I remembered the time she vanished for a weekend without telling anyone, and I was the one calling hospitals and friends, terrified, while our parents shrugged and said, "She does this sometimes." I remembered the dozens of parties I spent cleaning up her messes, covering for her, explaining her absences or outbursts or cruelty, all while she basked in the indulgence of being the dramatic one, the wounded bird everyone wanted to protect. I remembered the year she brought that guy she just started dating, Daniel, was it, to our Christmas dinner without warning, how he spent the night asking invasive questions about my salary and laughing when I said I worked in logistics. Martina said I was being too sensitive. Mom agreed. Dad changed the subject. Now they were all in the Pyrenees, bundled up in flannel, drinking hot chocolate and laughing under strings of fairy lights. And I was in my house, the house I'd offered to share, the house Martina still called Sophia's Plan B, and somehow I didn't feel like the one who'd been left out. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd been freed from a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. Then on the third day of their trip, I got a video call. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. When I saw Dad's name pop up, I accepted. He was sitting on the terrace of the rural house, wearing one of those tacky sweaters Martina always buys in bulk, a reindeer with a cocktail glass embroidered on the chest. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, with wind and distant laughter in the background. "We miss you up here." Before I could respond, the screen shifted. Martina appeared behind him, smiling, wearing my sweater. Not a sweater like mine, my sweater, the soft gray one with thumbholes I'd worn every winter since college. She must have taken it last month when she stayed over and forgot her travel bag again. I didn't say a word, just smiled, nodded, and ended the call. I didn't need to explain anything. I didn't owe that to anyone anymore. I opened my laptop, pulled up the security panel, and added a new line to the access log. I flagged her card for a notification, setting it to alert me if it was used again. Not because I thought she'd show up early, but because I hoped she would, because I wanted to see the look on her face when the door finally refused to open. It happened on a Thursday morning, one of those brittle, cold December mornings that paint frost in delicate veins across the windows and make your breath visible even indoors if you stand too close to the glass. I wasn't expecting anyone, not really, not yet, but something made me linger in the hallway longer than usual, sipping my coffee, staring at the front door like it had something to say. The house was quiet, almost too quiet for a home that had been scrubbed top to bottom in preparation for guests who never arrived. And yet, I think a part of me had already anticipated that the silence wouldn't last forever. When the notification pinged on my phone, the alert lighting up the screen, access denied, card for Martina. 3 failed attempts. I didn't smile, didn't laugh. I just exhaled, slow and steady, and walked toward the door with a calm that surprised even me. What struck me first wasn't that she'd tried to get in, or even that she'd tried 3 times, as if the lock might somehow forget what I'd told it just days ago. It was the audacity of showing up unannounced, without a text, without even a half-hearted "I'm back," as if she still considered this house her extension, her extra storage room, her fallback, her right. I stood there in the hallway barefoot, holding my coffee in one hand, watching the blur of her silhouette through the frosted glass, shifting from foot to foot in that familiar, impatient way she had when she didn't get what she wanted on the first try. Then came the knock, sharp, loud, insistent. The kind of knock you don't use with strangers or even acquaintances, but with people you expect to answer, people you feel entitled to, people you assume will open the door no matter what. And after the knock came the text, "Hey, I think your lock's broken. I tried my card and it just flashes red. Can you check it?" Not a single question mark in sight, not a hint of humility, not even a trace of awareness that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't supposed to be there at all. I didn't respond right away. I stood there, watching, and let the silence stretch a little longer, a little tauter, until the space between us, between me and the girl on the other side of the door who'd spent her whole life assuming I'd never say no, became almost tangible. When I finally typed my reply, I kept it simple, almost surgical. "It's working perfectly." I hit send. I watched her read it through the glass. I saw her shoulders straighten, her hand freeze mid-scroll, her expression shift from mild confusion to something closer to disbelief. She looked at the card, then the door, and tried again. Red flash, denied. There was a second knock, softer this time, followed by a long pause, then her voice, muffled, slightly raised, tinged with just enough condescension to pretend she was still in control. "Sophia, come on, I need my boots, you know, the ones I left here. Can you let me in for a sec?" But I didn't move, didn't respond, just sipped my coffee and stared at the door like it was a screen, and I was finally watching the climax of a movie I'd been writing in my head for years. Eventually, the knocking stopped. The shadow retreated. Another notification pinged, this time from the security camera app. Martina, stomping down the porch steps, crushing the thin layer of frost with those ridiculous designer sneakers she always wore, even in sub-zero weather, her fur-trimmed jacket billowing dramatically behind her, like she thought she was storming out of a movie scene. And maybe she was. Maybe in her mind, this was her grand, dramatic exit, the moment she could go back and play the victim, tell everyone how I'd locked her out in the cold like a heartless witch, how I'd changed the locks without warning, how I'd turned on her for no reason at all. And sure enough, that narrative wouldn't be hard to sell, especially to someone like my mom, who called less than an hour later, her voice so drenched in panic and guilt I didn't even need to check the caller ID to know what the conversation would be about. "Sophia," she started, her voice already cracking. "Martina says you didn't let her in. She's really upset. She just wanted her things. Can you call her, please? Can we talk?" I let the voicemail play out in full. I left it in my inbox for exactly 37 seconds, then deleted it. There was a time, not long ago, when I would have dropped everything to make that call, when I would have bent over backward to smooth things over before anyone else had a chance to feel uncomfortable, when I would have rushed to explain, to soften, to justify. But that time was gone. I'd spent too many years being the family's emotional janitor, always cleaning up Martina's messes, always being the one to absorb the damage and say, "It's fine," even when it was. And this wasn't a system glitch, not a misunderstanding. It was the first boundary I'd drawn that actually meant something, and for once I was going to let it stand. Still, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Martina had never been denied access to anything in her life, not a party, not a relationship, not a door. And the idea that I, of all people, had shut one in her face wasn't just an inconvenience, it was unthinkable. And people like Martina don't sulk, they scheme, they plot, they come back with tears and half-apologies and passive-aggressive jabs disguised as jokes. She'd return not because she wanted her boots, but because I'd shown her, for the first time, that I was no longer the supporting character in her highlight reel. I wasn't the plan B, not the wild card. I was the one with the keys. And whether she liked it or not, the door was staying shut until I decided otherwise. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too many hours, or staying up too late, or trying to balance it all. It comes from a lifetime of being the one who always lets things slide, who always says yes, who always keeps the peace, even when the silence it demands feels like swallowing glass. And for years, I wore that exhaustion like armor, mistaking it for resilience, convincing myself that patience was strength and self-sacrifice was some kind of quiet nobility. But after Martina walked away from my porch, like a woman who just discovered the world wasn't as malleable as she thought, and after my mother's trembling voice filled my voicemail with that familiar cocktail of guilt and emotional blackmail she'd perfected over decades, I found myself in my kitchen, holding the small metal tin where I used to keep the spare access cards, and I realized, with a kind of cold finality, that every card in that box was just another open door I'd left for people who didn't even bother to knock. There were 6 in total, neatly labeled in my handwriting because, of course, I was the one who'd labeled them, who'd made everything convenient, who'd tried to manage this house like a safe haven for a family that never fully respected what it cost to keep the peace. One for Martina, now deactivated. One for my parents, who mostly used it to come over in the summer when they wanted to use the patio for their wine nights. One for Aunt Lorna, who hadn't visited in over a year but still liked the idea of having access just in case. And 3 more for old friends and ex-boyfriend's brother, a dog walker I no longer hired. I stared at those cards for a long time, realizing how absurd it was that so many people had been given keys to my life, access to my space, entitlement to my generosity, and how rarely I'd stop to consider whether they deserved it. That night, I cooked dinner in complete silence. No music, no TV, just the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board and the occasional hiss of the pan. And I thought, not for the first time, about how many conversations I'd avoided just to keep things from becoming a problem. Like the year Martina ruined Christmas Eve by bringing up my latest breakup over dessert, smirking as she described how Sophia's guys always run when they realize she's not as perfect as she seems. And how I'd smiled politely, even poured her another glass of wine, while my chest burned with humiliation and rage. Or the time I paid half of my parents' plumbing bill because Martina promised she Venmo me later, then ghosted the topic like it never existed. I'd swallowed so many small betrayals over the years that I could barely tell where forgiveness ended and spinelessness began. I took the access cards one by one and fed them into the paper shredder I kept in the hallway closet, the same one I used for old tax documents and expired warranties, listening to the soft grinding sound as the plastic turned to fragments. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud, but in that moment it felt like one of the most powerful things I'd ever done. The next day I called my parents, not to apologize, not to explain, but to invite them to dinner. I wanted to see their faces, to see how they'd respond when I finally stopped filtering myself for their comfort. When they arrived, I served the food I cooked myself, set the table with real cloth napkins and matching silverware, and waited until we were halfway through dinner before saying anything that deviated from the usual script. "I've deactivated all the spare keys," I said, my voice calm, almost clinical. "All of them." My mother blinked. My father looked up from his plate but didn't speak. "I don't want people coming and going without asking," I continued. "Not anymore. This is my house, and I've let it become a revolving door for people who never truly asked for permission, who assumed access was permanent just because I never revoked it." Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Dad shifted in his chair and finally said, "Martina didn't mean any harm." "I know," I said. "She never does, that's the problem. And no one ever calls her out when she crosses a line because you're all so worried she'll fall apart. But I'm done being the one who takes the hit." There was silence after that, and I let it stretch. For once, I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't offer comfort or steer the conversation to safer ground. I let them sit in it, let them squirm in the discomfort they'd been shielded from for years at my expense. Then slowly my mother said, "You could have said something." And I laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, but with an incredulity so sharp it almost pierced my chest. "Said what, Mom?" "That I didn't like being erased from my own family. That it hurt when no one stood up for me. That every time she mocks me in front of you, it chips away at what's left of my patience. I tried, Mom, for years, and every time I was told to let it go. So I did until I didn't." She looked down. Dad picked up his water glass. The room felt colder than it had a few minutes ago, like the truth had dropped the temperature. After they left, quietly, awkwardly muttering things like "thanks for dinner" and "we'll talk soon," I sat alone in the living room, sipping the last of my wine, staring at the fireplace that hadn't been lit since last winter. Martina hadn't called back, but I'd seen her online. She posted a photo that day, a carefully staged shot of her in a cafe with a vague, biting caption. "Some people build walls instead of bridges. Guess which ones burn faster." It wasn't subtle, wasn't even clever, but it was public, and it was meant to hurt. I drafted a response more than once, something equally vague but infinitely sharper. But in the end, I closed the app without posting a word. I didn't need to clap back. I didn't need to correct her narrative because the truth was no longer hers to twist. She could say whatever she wanted, but the door would stay shut, and the spare key no longer existed. It's strange how quickly a house that once felt like a gathering place, a hub of warmth and hospitality, can transform into something quieter, heavier, more self-contained. not because someone stole its energy, but because you finally stopped inviting people to siphon it away. In the week that followed the dinner with my parents and Martina's brief failed attempt to re-enter my life, the silence in my home began to feel less like an absence and more like a decision, as if the stillness had taken root, not from abandonment or loneliness, but from the slow, intentional act of reclaiming a space that had never truly been mine, even when I was the one paying the mortgage and fluffing the guest pillows. And somewhere in that calm, between the muted winter sun spilling through the windows and the soft hum of the heater, I realized I wasn't mourning the loss of my family's approval. I was detoxing from a dynamic that had kept me small, compliant, and perpetually available. I didn't reach out to Martina, or my parents, or any of the distant relatives who'd started commenting vague sentiments on Facebook posts like "families go through phases," or "you only have one sister," as if those platitudes carried any weight against the silent violence of being erased over and over, and expected to smile through it because someone else's feelings were always louder. I didn't need their reconciliation tactics, their theatrical concern, or their barely veiled attempts to nudge me back into the role I'd spent my entire adult life trying to escape. So on Christmas Eve, the same night my family would be singing carols around a fireplace in the rural house, probably still pretending my absence was just an unfortunate scheduling conflict, I did something I hadn't done in years. I hosted a Christmas dinner that wasn't for them. I set the table for 5, choosing guests not by blood or history, but by kindness, by presence, by the fact that in their quiet way, they'd made me feel seen in a year when the people who should have cared most didn't bother to notice I was drowning in their indifference. Andrea from work arrived first, arms full of homemade bread and mismatched Tupperware, apologizing for the mess and laughing at her own chaos. Then came Daniel from the dog park, still in his boots, with his 7-year-old daughter in tow, carrying a store-bought pie like it was a treasure. And finally, Maya, my yoga instructor, who'd quietly confessed after class that she had nowhere to go and didn't want to spend another holiday watching reruns with her cat and pretending it was enough. There was no matching dishware, no theme, no carefully curated playlist for Instagram-worthy ambience. There was laughter, real, loud, unscripted laughter. There were stories that unraveled into tangents, food that didn't quite go together, and a kid who accidentally knocked over a glass of juice but wasn't scolded, just helped. There was no tension, no tiptoeing, no passive-aggressive jokes disguised as just kidding, and no one asked why my sister wasn't there. For the first time in years, I didn't spend the night scanning the room for disapproval or bracing for the moment someone crossed a line and expected me to clean it up. It was late, well past midnight, when the knock came at the door, not the rushed, demanding kind Martina had used when she assumed I owed her entry, but a slower, hesitant rhythm that suggested someone unsure of their welcome. I didn't check the camera, I already knew. When I opened the door, Martina was there, bundled in a thick wool coat, hands shoved deep in her pockets, hair tucked under a beanie I hadn't seen before. And for a moment, we looked at each other, not as sisters, not as rivals, but as two women who'd grown up in the same house and somehow learned entirely different lessons about what love required. "I'm not here to fight," she said, her voice lower than usual, stripped of its usual gloss. And if it hadn't been for the quiet street behind her and the soft glow of the porch light catching the edge of her eyes, I might have thought I was imagining the vulnerability on her face. I just wanted to say I get it, not all of it, but some, and I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I didn't invite her in. I didn't slam the door either. I just stood there, leaning against the frame, letting her words hang in the air like breath in the cold. "I miss you," she added, softer now, almost childlike. "We all do, but I get why you're not answering. I really do." And maybe she did, or maybe she didn't. Maybe this was just another attempt to reset the narrative, to pull me back into the family photo now that my absence had started to feel inconvenient instead of symbolic. Maybe this wasn't about me at all, but about what my silence had taken away from their traditions, their comfort, their ability to pretend things had always been fine. "I spent 38 years being the quiet one," I said finally, my voice steady, my hand resting lightly on the door. "And no one noticed how loud it got in here, not once. So if you're really here for me, and not just to make things normal again, you can stand in the cold a little longer, because I'm not the one who needs to come inside." She flinched once, twice. Her eyes didn't well up, her lips didn't tremble. There was no dramatic turn, no parting shot thrown over her shoulder. She just stood there for a few seconds more, then turned and walked away, her boots crunching softly on the frosted grass. I closed the door, locked it, and rested my forehead against the wood. In the kitchen, the laughter had started up again. Someone asked if we had more napkins. The warmth, the noise, the unfiltered joy, it was all still there. It hadn't faded just because she'd shown up. Later, long after the guests had gone and the dishes were washed and stacked, I sat in the silence again. But this time it didn't feel like a void, it felt like a choice. Maybe one day Martina and I will find a way to talk without hurting each other, without keeping score or casting blame. Maybe one day the door will open again, but if it does, it'll be on my terms, not out of guilt, not out of habit, and certainly not because I've gone back to being the quiet one. For now, the silence is mine, and for once, it sounds exactly the way I want it to.